Right, we're considering here the relationships between theoretical physics as a framework for understanding reality and the position of an embodied one, which is the starting point for an embodied cognitive science. And both domains have a relationship to mathematics which remains to be sorted out, to be honest with you. We've been looking in particular at measurement, and from the position of an embodied being, reality appears continuous, and this introduces questions when it comes to measurement of space and time, space and time, space and time. We can't seem to separate those. Physics makes use of space-time and an absolute set of coordinates derived from its treatment of light, which is a specific and ideal treatment of light. It acquires enormous facility in measurement given its particular stance with respect to light. And in measurement of space, the meter is introduced as an absolute measurement. Whereas what I've been trying to point out is that measurement in space is a process that goes on in which one thing is aligned with another thing. So the meter that used to be locked up in a vault in Paris was the ideal standard, but of course for actual measurements you need things like rulers. You need to be able to place one thing beside another and measure. Now, the meter has proved to be enormously successful. What a wonderful feat of the imagination it was, and we've seen some of the physical imagination up to now. But this treatment of space is ideal, it's an abstraction, and the embodied being might choose to start with different abstractions. That space cannot be measured using an abstract unit of measurement becomes clear when we try to measure coastlines. And yes, those of you who know your mathematics will know I'm talking about fractals here, but if something is continuous in space and time and it forms a border with something else, as for example the sea and the land on a coastline, then the length of anything depends on the unit that you use to measure it. There's no standardized unit for measuring coastlines, and it's meaningless to ask how long a coastline is. To measure a coastline, you have to decide on an appropriate unit that will reveal the coastline in terms you can understand. Using the meter as an abstract unit ignores this property, which only arises when you address phenomena that arise in continuous embodied space. So physics is an idealism, and it makes use of ideal constructs of space using points, lines, volumes, and so on. And we've seen some wonderful geometry here. We've seen the Greeks and their fascination with compasses and rulers, actually. Compasses and rulers are the means by which the Greeks sort out space. Now, this is not an ideal compass. An ideal compass wouldn't make a mark on the page. The secret compass of the Arab geometers with its bimetallic head is not available to me, I'm afraid. I just picked this one up at the supermarket. And that's kind of what measurement is like. You don't have the actual ideal French meter to take with you to your building site. That would give you a very high quality measurement, but of course you'd still be copying the meter from one place to another. Speaking from an embodied position, it's more like you have to measure space with a compass like this. This is a really wonky, lousy compass. It's brilliant. It's made of plastic and you stick it on a whiteboard and you draw wonky circles with it. As an embodied being, you abandon all hope at precision and do what you can in measurement. But I'm not a physicist and I'm not a mathematician, but I am an embodied cognitive scientist. That's the position that these videos are being made from. So it's time to move these considerations to recognize that in our treatment of anything that's not physics, we need somewhere else to start. Now, the obvious difficulties that arise in language, speaking of subjects and objects, is too well known to bear unpacking here. Science objectifies. Science uses measurement to objectify. And in cognitive science, we are somehow concerned with subjectivity. I'm afraid we're concerned with understanding things from a living and lived point of view, as it were. And it's been necessary for me to remove all the other sciences and leave just the question of embodied, inquiry, and theoretical physics in order to come back and ask what kind of an idealism would we use as embodied cognitive scientists. And it's become fairly clear we like this guy. For some reason, embodied cognitive science is fascinating. Well, cognitive science and people in general are fascinated with brains. Brains. How much do we attribute to brains? Brains are organs of the body, like kidneys. And they need to be understood as such. But the brain, and here's the terrible secret, the brain doesn't exist. I'm afraid the brain is an ideal object. Through inquiry into bodies and understanding and so on, we've discovered that there's a nervous system integrated into the body as a whole, but to isolate something called a brain from that is to introduce an arbitrary cut, a one without another, that we started this video sequence with. Because in the nervous system, there's no border between the brain and the rest of the nervous system. And when we consider it like that, there's no border between the nervous system and the rest of the body. In fact, nervous systems, if we want to understand them sensibly, form a complementary pair with muscles. They arrive in the evolutionary scheme at the same time as muscles, and as Fred Kaiser has done wonderful work to suggest, nervous systems cannot be understood except in their capacity to organize the movement of the body. So the brain itself is an idealism, and people have been projecting everything onto the brain, the seat of consciousness, home of perception, everything going in the eyes and in the ears into some homunculus inside who's reporting back. People identify with their brains, and the brain is an idealism. So that sets the tenor now for where we're going to go with the remaining videos in this series, and I have no idea where we're going. But we're going to take seriously the idea that the brain is itself an idealism, and that there's something peculiar here. We've got physics with its ideal treatment of light, and we've got the position of the embodied cognitive scientist, who might take a different perspective with respect to such notions as light, space, and time in order to better understand what kind of an idealism is involved when we treat the brain as if it were a center of subjectivity, the ideal imaginary brain. This is not a usual way to approach such topics, and that's why we have to approach it in this fashion, simply talking about it. But in subsequent videos now we're going to take very seriously the idealism of cognitive science and wonder what it means for the inquirer to be the kind of deluded person who might think that they're their brain. I have really no idea where this is going, but it sounds like a fun trip.